My name is Avia Bishop, I'm 28, and I grew up in a quiet suburb of Portland. My parents are both lawyers, my brother Noah is the golden child, and I'm the one they always forget. The night I graduated from medical school, the biggest day of my life, my parents threw a huge party at home. But it wasn't for me. It was for Noah's promotion. He didn't even show up until midnight, drunk and laughing, while I stood there in my cap and gown, invisible in my own house. That night, something broke. I decided if they wouldn't see me, I'd make sure they'd never forget me. Would you forgive a family that celebrated your brother while erasing your moment? I've always believed that some wounds don't bleed on the outside. They grow quietly, year after year, tucked beneath polite smiles and family dinners. My name is Avia Bishop, and I'm 28 years old. I grew up in a quiet suburb just outside Portland, in a 2-story white house with blue shutters and a front porch that looked like it belonged on a postcard. From the outside, we were the Bishops, respected, successful, flawless. My parents were both partners at their law firm. My brother Noah was the golden child, and I was the background character in my own story. When I was little, I thought the way my parents treated Noah was normal. He was older, louder, more confident. He filled every room like he owned it. Every good grade he brought home earned cheers and ice cream. Every trophy he won was displayed in the hallway like sacred relics. My achievements, meanwhile, usually ended up taped to the fridge for a few days before being covered by grocery lists. "You're such a quiet one, Avia," my mom would say with a distracted smile, flipping through case files at the kitchen counter. "Noah just shines more." I used to nod, pretending it didn't sting. I remember one particular afternoon when I was 12. I'd won first place in a regional science competition, a big deal for me. My parents promised they'd come to the award ceremony. But that morning, Noah broke his wrist during football practice. Of course, they rushed to the hospital, and by evening, the house was full of visitors fussing over him. My medal hung around my neck like a secret no one cared to notice. I ate dinner alone that night, still wearing it. The mashed potatoes had gone cold, but the silence was worse. Years passed, and those moments piled up like layers of dust. Birthdays forgotten, report cards ignored, achievements downplayed. Noah got a car at 16, I got a second-hand bike at 17. He was encouraged to chase every dream, I was told to be practical. It wasn't hatred, I need to make that clear. My parents didn't hate me, they simply didn't see me. By high school, I'd learned to stop expecting applause. I threw myself into books, late-night study sessions, and quiet victories. I earned scholarships through sheer determination. When I got accepted into medical school, I remember telling my parents over dinner. My dad nodded absently, scrolling through his phone, and my mom said, "That's great, honey. Did you hear Noah might make junior partner early?" I laughed softly to hide the lump in my throat. There's a kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who should know you best but never truly look. That was my reality. I became the reliable one, the listener, the daughter who didn't cause trouble. The more invisible I felt, the harder I worked, hoping, stupidly, that one day they'd finally notice. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: being overlooked for too long doesn't make you disappear. It makes you quiet and patience can turn into something else entirely. The night I graduated from medical school should have been the proudest moment of my life. Years of exhaustion, sleepless rotations, and self-doubt had finally led to that single day. I imagined it so many times, my parents standing in the crowd, beaming with pride, maybe even tears in their eyes. I imagined family photos, a celebratory dinner, my name spoken with warmth. Instead, when I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I scanned the audience and saw no one. 2 empty seats in the parents' section stared back at me like a cruel joke. My hands trembled as I accepted the diploma. The applause felt hollow. My classmates ran into the arms of their families. I walked alone to the parking lot, clutching my gown in the cold night air. When I called my mom, her voice was loud with music and laughter. "Oh, honey, we're so sorry we couldn't make it," she said breathlessly. "Noah just got promoted to senior associate. We threw a last-minute party at the house. You should come by after." A promotion, my graduation night had been replaced, again by Noah's victory. I sat in my car for a full minute, staring at the dashboard, the sound of people celebrating through the phone like static in my ears. I didn't cry. I just went numb. But I went. Part of me still wanted to be part of the family. When I arrived, the house was glowing with warm light, music spilling through the open doors. People I didn't even know clinked champagne glasses in my parents' living room. Noah was in the center, flushed with alcohol and praise, hugging colleagues. When he spotted me, he grinned lazily. "Hey, doctor," he slurred, patting my shoulder. "You made it." I stood there in my cap and gown, invisible in my own home. My parents didn't even notice I'd walked in until half an hour later. My mom hugged me distractedly, her perfume thick, her mind elsewhere. My dad said, "Congratulations, sweetheart," then turned to answer a partner's question. It wasn't cruel, it was worse. It was indifferent. I slipped out to the backyard, desperate for air. The night was quiet compared to the noise inside. I leaned against the railing, the cool wood grounding me. My gown rustled softly in the breeze, and I stared at the lake in the distance, the same lake I used to escape to as a teenager when the house felt too loud and too empty at the same time. And then I heard it. My father's voice, low and serious, coming from the study through a half-open window. I froze. "We need to make sure Avia doesn't find out about the original will," he said. My mother's voice followed, tense. "She won't. Noah already signed everything. As far as she knows, the estate is his. It's better this way. She wouldn't know how to handle that kind of responsibility." My pulse slammed against my ribs. I pressed closer to the wall, heart racing. Original will? Estate? What were they talking about? My father sighed. "If she ever finds out, we could have a legal mess. But honestly, she's too trusting. She'll stay in her lane." I stayed there long after they left the study, my mind spiraling. They had hidden something from me, something big, a will, an estate. All those years of being treated like an afterthought suddenly felt less like neglect and more like strategy. That night, as the party raged on inside, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was curious. And beneath that curiosity, something colder began to take shape. They thought I'd never look. They were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, still wearing my graduation hoodie, my phone on silent. Every word I'd overheard replayed in my head, louder each time. "She won't find out, she's too trusting." They'd been so sure of it. The next morning, the world looked the same, birds chirped, sunlight filtered through the blinds, but something inside me had changed. For 28 years, I'd been the quiet one, the overlooked daughter who didn't ask questions. That version of me had walked across the stage last night. She was gone now. I called my mom around noon. "I've been so busy with school that I feel like I've lost touch with everyone," I said casually. "I was thinking maybe I could come home for a few weeks, just to breathe before residency starts." She sounded delighted. "Oh, honey, that's a wonderful idea. Your old room is exactly how you left it. It'll be nice to have you here again." She had no idea. 2 days later, I drove back to the Bishop estate. The closer I got, the more memories crowded in: the white fences, the tree-lined street, the manicured lawn. Everything looked perfect, like a frozen photograph. But under that picture-perfect surface, I knew now there were secrets buried deep. As I stepped inside, my mother rushed to hug me, warm and perfumed, just like always. My dad gave me a pat on the shoulder, distracted but approving. Noah, of course, leaned against the banister like he owned the place, smirking. "Back already, Doc? Couldn't stay away from home?" I smiled thinly. "Something like that." For the first couple of days, I played my role flawlessly. I helped set the table for dinner, joined family breakfasts, went on morning walks with my mom. I asked about Noah's work, laughed at my dad's dry jokes, nodded at everything. But beneath that calm surface, I was watching, listening, waiting. Their routines hadn't changed. My parents' study was still off limits. Noah strutted around like the heir to a kingdom. I started noticing details I'd never paid attention to before: locked drawers in my father's desk, folders my mother tucked away as soon as I walked in, whispered conversations behind half-closed doors. At night, when the house settled into silence, I explored. I crept into the unused library, flicked through old photo albums, checked the basement storage. It was like peeling layers off an old wound, painful but necessary. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, I caught Noah staring at me suspiciously. "You're acting different," he said. I dried my hands slowly. "I'm just tired." His eyes narrowed for a second, then he shrugged and walked off. I exhaled. He wasn't wrong, though. I was different. By the end of the first week, I'd found nothing concrete, but the energy in the house was shifting. My parents started asking when I'd be starting my residency, subtly hinting I shouldn't linger too long. Noah made passive-aggressive jokes about the prodigal daughter returning. I acted unbothered. But each passing day only sharpened my resolve. If there truly was a will, an estate, they'd hidden it well. But they'd also underestimated me. I'd spent years training to catch the smallest anomalies in human bodies. Now I was applying that same precision to my family. And like any good diagnosis, the truth starts with careful observation. A few nights later, the house fell into one of those deep suburban silences that almost feels staged. I waited until I heard Noah's heavy footsteps upstairs and the quiet click of my parents' bedroom door before slipping out of my room. The old hardwood floor creaked beneath my socks, just like it always had when I was a kid sneaking to the kitchen for midnight snacks. Only this time, I wasn't after cookies. The library had always fascinated me: mahogany shelves, dust motes swirling in the dim lamplight, a faint scent of old paper and lemon polish. It was one of the few rooms my parents rarely entered anymore, which made it the perfect place to start. I pulled out drawers, flipped through stacks of old legal journals, and carefully lifted picture frames off the walls to check behind them. Nothing. Then, tucked inside an old photo album from the early 2000s, I found a thin envelope. It was yellowed around the edges, my grandmother's neat cursive scrawled across the front. "For Avia when the time is right." My throat tightened. She passed away 3 years ago. I slid onto the floor and carefully opened it. Inside was a short handwritten letter. "My dearest Avia, you've always had a quiet strength. If you're reading this, something tells me that quiet will soon be needed. I made sure to do what I believed was fair. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Look where the music stops. Love always, Grandma Leela." I read it twice, 3 times. Look where the music stops? It sounded like some cryptic riddle, but Grandma Leela had always loved puzzles. She also loved music, especially the old grand piano in the sunroom. Heart pounding, I tiptoed down the hallway toward the sunroom. Moonlight spilled through the glass walls, bathing the piano in silver. I lifted the lid, pressing a few keys. The sound was slightly off. I pressed another section, and one of the keys made a dull, muted thunk. The hiding place. With trembling fingers, I slid the panel up and felt inside. My hand brushed against something flat and metallic. It was a small flash drive wrapped in a silk handkerchief. On it, in faded pen, were the words, "Original." I didn't even breathe as I pocketed it and hurried back to my room. My laptop whirred to life, the dim screen casting a pale glow. The drive contained several PDF files, scanned documents, dates, legal headers, my grandmother's signature, and most importantly, a will. As I read through it, my stomach flipped. In this original will, Grandma had left me the lake house, her most treasured property, and a majority share in her trust. Noah's portion was much smaller. This was a completely different distribution from what I'd been told after her death. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd erased me, deliberately. For the first time, the anger wasn't buried beneath confusion or pain. It burned clear and steady. They had rewritten my grandmother's legacy to fit their narrative, counting on me to be the quiet one. But they'd overlooked something important. Grandma had seen me. She trusted me to find the truth. I closed the laptop and stared out the window at the moonlit lake. I could almost hear her voice, gentle but firm. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." They thought they'd hidden everything, but the music had stopped and I'd found where. I didn't confront them right away. That would have been my old instinct, desperate for explanations, hoping that the truth alone would make them love me differently. But this time, I didn't want their approval. I wanted control. The next morning, over coffee, my mom asked lightly, "Have you thought about your residency placement? It's coming up soon, right?" Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah," I said casually, stirring my coffee. "I've been thinking a lot lately. Maybe I'll stay here for a while." Her hand froze midair just for a split second. "Here, at home?" I nodded. "It feels nice to be back." It was a lie. What felt nice was watching her mask slip ever so slightly. Later that day, I made a quiet call from my car. It was to Mr. Dalton, my grandmother's former lawyer. He sounded surprised to hear from me, but when I mentioned that I'd found something in the house, his tone sharpened. "Avia," he said slowly, "if what you have is the original document, then someone has tampered with the estate. That's a serious matter." "I know," I whispered. "That's why I need to be smart." We agreed to meet the following week, away from the house. In the meantime, I needed to keep my family completely unaware that I knew anything, so I played my part flawlessly. At dinner that night, Noah was bragging about some upcoming firm gala where he was going to represent the family. My dad laughed proudly, my mom beamed, I swirled my wine, smiling faintly. Noah turned to me. "So, doctor, what's next? Saving lives, changing the world?" "Something like that," I said, keeping my voice soft. He didn't notice the edge underneath. After everyone went to bed, I opened my laptop again. I scanned through the will file carefully, highlighting inconsistencies between the original and the final version they'd announced 3 years ago. They hadn't just reduced my share, they'd rewritten entire clauses. Signatures looked altered. Some dates didn't match. It was sloppy in places, arrogant in others, as if they believed no one would ever check. In a way, I understood why they thought they could. For years, I'd given them every reason to underestimate me. I was the quiet daughter, the one who never demanded space. But now, every overlooked moment, every forgotten birthday, every stolen celebration, they'd all stacked into something unshakable. I spent the next few days planting seeds. I asked Noah innocent questions about the firm, about our grandmother's lake house. His answers were dismissive, careless. He didn't suspect a thing. My parents, however, started to grow uneasy. My dad lingered near the study more often. My mom double-checked locked drawers. I pretended not to notice. The night before my meeting with Mr. Dalton, I stood alone on the back porch, staring at the lake. The water reflected the moonlight like cracked glass. This was the place where I used to come as a teenager when the house became too suffocating. Back then, I'd come here to escape. Now I was here to plan. The truth was finally in my hands, and for the first time in my life, the power was too. I whispered into the night, almost like a promise to my younger self. They won't get away with this. I met Mr. Dalton on a gray Tuesday morning at a small cafe downtown, one of those quiet places tucked between old bookstores and office buildings, where no one pays attention to anyone else. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds, as if Portland itself was holding its breath. I arrived early, wearing a simple trench coat and pulling my hair into a low bun. I looked less like a newly minted doctor and more like someone with secrets. When he walked in, I recognized him instantly. He'd been at my grandmother's funeral 3 years ago, a tall man with sharp eyes and a surprisingly gentle voice. He shook my hand firmly before sliding into the booth across from me. "You look just like Leela when she was your age," he said, studying me. She had that same, determined look. "She was good at hiding things," I said quietly, pulling the flash drive from my coat pocket and placing it on the table between us. "Apparently, so am I," he arched a brow but didn't speak until the waitress left with our orders. Then he plugged the drive into his laptop. His face stayed calm as he scrolled through the files, but I caught the subtle tightening of his jaw. "This," he said finally, turning the screen toward me, "is the original will, no question, and what they registered with the court is not." I thought so. My voice was steady, but my hands were clenched beneath the table. He leaned back. "Your grandmother signed this version 2 months before she passed. The distribution is clear. You inherit the lake house and majority shares. Noah receives a significantly smaller portion. This document was witnessed, notarized, and filed with my office. But shortly after her death, your father requested a revised will. He claimed she wanted to simplify the estate. I refused to draft it. Weeks later, a new will appeared, signed, stamped, completely different. I was cut out of the loop." I stared at him. "And you didn't do anything?" "I raised objections," he said with a bitter smile. "But your father is a skilled attorney, Avia. He buried me in legal maneuvering, made it look like I'd simply misfiled something, and you never contested it. Because I didn't know." The words came out sharper than I intended. He nodded slowly. "You were grieving. They took advantage of that. But now that you have this file, things are different." We spent the next hour going through every clause. He explained my legal options, contesting the will, filing a civil suit, even pushing for fraud charges. But he also warned me it wouldn't be easy. My family was powerful, well-connected. If I confronted them prematurely, they'd close ranks fast. I wasn't planning to confront them. Not yet. As I drove back to the estate, the rain started, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the windshield like impatient fingers. My grandmother's words echoed in my head, "Look where the music stops." I'd found where it stopped. Now I needed to decide where it would start again. When I walked into the house, my father was in the study with Noah. Their voices carried into the hallway. "She's been here too long," Noah was saying. "She's up to something. She asks too many questions." "I'm aware," my father replied coolly. "But pushing her will only make her suspicious. She's still the same naive girl who believes in family loyalty. She won't do anything drastic." I smiled to myself unseen, if only they knew. I stepped into the doorway, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, didn't realize you two were in here." My father looked up, his expression perfectly composed. "Just discussing some firm matters. How was your day?" "Fine," I said lightly. "I met a friend for coffee." Noah's eyes narrowed slightly. He was sharper than he looked, and paranoia came naturally to him, but his arrogance usually won. "You're not planning to move back in permanently, are you?" he asked, half joking. "I don't know," I said with a shrug. "Maybe?" That night after dinner, I took a walk by the lake. The water shimmered under the streetlights, rippling with the wind. This place had always been my refuge, but tonight it felt like a chessboard. Every move I made had to count. I started keeping a hidden notebook in my room, dates, conversations, small inconsistencies I noticed around the house. My mother whispering on the phone late at night. My father locking the study more often. Noah spending hours on calls he'd end the second I walked by. Nothing was solid yet, but patterns were forming. A few days later, I invited Noah for lunch in town, acting like a sister who wanted to catch up. He was smug, ordering the most expensive items like it was his birthright. Between bites, he bragged about upcoming promotions, future plans, and how our parents were setting him up to take over. He spoke like someone who'd already won. "So," I said casually, sipping my drink, "do you ever miss Grandma's lake house?" He blinked. "What? The lake house. She loved that place. I was just thinking about it the other night." Noah laughed. "Why would I miss it? It's basically mine now. Mom and Dad said it'll pass to me when they restructure the trust." I tilted my head. "Interesting, I always thought she was pretty fair about things." He waved his hand dismissively. "Yeah, well, she changed her mind before she died. I mean, you were always the bookworm. She knew I could handle the real responsibilities." Every word he said was useful. Not because it was true, but because it revealed how confident he was in the lie. He didn't even consider that I might already know the truth. As we left the restaurant, he draped an arm over my shoulder like the charming older brother he liked to pretend to be. "Don't worry, Av, you'll have your career. I'll handle the family legacy. Everyone wins." I smiled sweetly. Of course, everyone wins. Inside, my resolve sharpened. The game had started. They didn't know the board had changed. I began to see the house differently. The halls I'd once walked through on autopilot now felt like corridors of secrets. Every creak in the floorboards, every hushed conversation after midnight, every locked drawer was a potential lead. I kept my movements deliberate, never hurried. Patience, I reminded myself. This wasn't about revenge in one dramatic blow. This was about precision. My first step was to secure everything I'd found. The original will, the notes from my meeting with Mr. Dalton, my recordings of family conversations, all of it was backed up onto 2 encrypted drives. One I kept with me at all times. The other I hid inside the piano, exactly where Grandma had hidden the original flash drive. It felt poetic. Then I started gathering new information. Noah was the easiest to observe. He was arrogant, loud, and careless. Most evenings he'd pour himself expensive whiskey and take calls on the patio, thinking no one was listening. But from my bedroom window, if I kept the lights off, I could hear almost everything. "Yeah, the assets are already under my control," he bragged one night. "Avi doesn't care about this stuff. She's practically a guest here. Once the trust is restructured, it's done. No loopholes." I recorded it all on my phone, careful to keep the microphone close to the window. Each conversation added to the pile, pieces of a puzzle they didn't know I was assembling. My parents were trickier. They'd spent their lives reading people, anticipating angles. My father especially had the kind of lawyer's mind that spotted traps before they were set, so I made sure my traps didn't look like traps. One evening, after dinner, I asked innocently, "Dad, I was organizing some of Grandma's old things and found a few papers. There were references to a trust." "Did you ever explain that to me? I was young back then." He froze for a fraction of a second, just enough. "It's complicated legal stuff, sweetheart. We simplified things after she passed. You don't need to worry about it." I nodded, playing along. "Right, I guess I'm just curious. She always talked about wanting everything to be fair." He gave a practiced smile. "And it was, we made sure of that." Later, my mom came into my room, holding a cup of chamomile tea like she used to when I pulled all-nighters for exams. "Honey," she said softly, "I know coming back home can stir up a lot of feelings, but you don't need to think about the estate. That was all handled years ago. You have such a bright future ahead of you. Don't let old paperwork distract you." I almost laughed. They were trying to redirect me like I was still the obedient daughter who'd drop anything to keep the peace. Instead, I thanked her for the tea. A few days later, I laid the groundwork for my first real trap. I accidentally left a manila folder slightly visible in the library. Inside, it was a copy of a fake legal inquiry letter addressed to Mr. Dalton, mentioning reopening probate due to discrepancies in the will. The letter was real enough to pass a casual glance, but deliberately incomplete, like something I was in the middle of working on. Then I waited. It only took 24 hours. I came home from a jog and found the folder missing. Later that night, I overheard Noah in my father's study. "She's digging," he said, his voice tight. "I found this in the library. What the hell is she doing?" My father exhaled sharply. "She's bluffing. She doesn't have the resources to reopen anything, probably just curious." "What if she talks to Dalton?" "She won't," he said with certainty that almost made me smile. "She's family. She wouldn't embarrass us." They still didn't get it. They were playing a game they thought they controlled, not realizing the board had already shifted. Around the same time, my relationship with Noah grew tense. He started making passive-aggressive comments at breakfast. "You've been awfully nosy lately," he said one morning while buttering his toast. I met his gaze evenly. "I live here, remember? I'm just trying to reconnect." He smirked. "Right, reconnect. Unless there's something you don't want me to reconnect with," I added lightly, just enough to make his jaw tight. He stood abruptly and left the table. My mother gave me a disapproving look, like I'd been the one to ruin the mood. Typical. Late one night, I decided to explore my father's study properly. Breaking into my parents' private space wasn't something I took lightly. But this wasn't a teenage rebellion. This was war. The study smelled like leather and old paper. Bookshelves lined the walls, and his massive oak desk sat squarely in the center, immovable. I knew better than to leave obvious signs of tampering, so I used the skills that had gotten me through med school: calm hands, sharp focus, steady breathing. The bottom drawer was locked. That's where lawyers keep the good stuff. I'd watched him enough to know which key he used for it. A week earlier, he'd left his keyring on the kitchen counter, and I'd quietly made a wax imprint of the one I suspected. I'd spent an hour filing down a hardware store copy until it clicked smoothly. Inside, I found neatly labeled folders, trust restructuring documents, tax filings, asset transfer forms. Most of it was standard, but one folder stood out: Revised Will Final. I snapped photos of every page with my phone, careful not to disturb the order. There it was in black and white, the fraudulent will, dated weeks after my grandmother's passing. Her signature looked forced. Witness signatures were all employees from my father's firm. The document was airtight on the surface, but sloppy underneath if you knew what to look for. And I did. I slipped everything back, locked the drawer, and exhaled slowly in the hallway. My heart pounded, not from fear, but exhilaration. The pieces were falling into place. By the end of that week, I had more than suspicion. I had evidence. Not enough to end the game yet, but enough to set it on fire when the time came. Noah started watching me like a hawk. My parents, meanwhile, tried to smother me with forced normalcy: family dinners, casual chats, invitations to firm events. But underneath their polished masks, I saw the flickers of unease. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trying to fit into their world. They were adjusting to mine. The thing about lies is that they leave fingerprints. My family had spent years building their facade: careful, polished, untouchable. But once I started looking closely, I realized just how many smudges they'd left behind. The first clue came from an unexpected place: the church. Grandma Leela's funeral had been held at a small chapel on the outskirts of town. She'd been beloved in the community, and I remembered vaguely how many people had come that day. One afternoon, under the guise of visiting her grave, I stopped by the chapel. It wasn't sentimentality. It was strategy. The elderly pastor still recognized me. "Avia Bishop," he said, his eyes softening. "You look just like Leela. She'd be so proud of you." We sat in the quiet pews, sunlight filtering through stained glass. I asked casually if he remembered anything unusual around the time of her death. He frowned slightly. "Well, your father and some of his colleagues came to see me a few weeks after the funeral, wanted to confirm the dates on some legal documents. They seemed in a hurry." I thought it odd, considering everything was supposed to have been settled before the funeral. My pulse quickened. "Do you remember exactly when?" He nodded slowly. "I keep records of everyone who books meetings here. Lawyers are particular about details." He disappeared into the back office and returned with a small ledger. There it was in neat handwriting: Bishop, R. and Associates, consultation, trust inquiry, 2 weeks after Leela Bishop's funeral. It wasn't proof by itself. But it was a trail. The second breakthrough came from someone I hadn't spoken to in years: Mrs. Hensley, Grandma's former housekeeper. She worked for our family for decades and had retired shortly after Grandma passed. I found her through a mutual acquaintance and invited her to lunch. She hugged me warmly, her silver hair pinned back, her eyes sharp despite her age. "I always knew you'd grow into something strong," she said, squeezing my hand. We made small talk for a while before I steered the conversation gently. "Do you remember anything strange after Grandma died? Anything about the will?" Her expression shifted. She hesitated. "I shouldn't, but Leela trusted you. She used to tell me that you had her heart." She leaned closer. "The night before she went into the hospital, your father visited her alone. He asked everyone else to leave the room, even me. She was weak but alert. They spoke for nearly an hour. When he left, she was furious. I heard her on the phone with her lawyer shouting, 'I will not be bullied in my own house.'" My chest tightened. "Did she say what he wanted?" "She didn't tell me, but the next day she collapsed. And after the funeral, your father and Noah spent days in the study, doors closed. Papers went in, papers came out. That wasn't how Leela handled her affairs. She was meticulous." This was more than suspicious now. This was a crack in their carefully constructed wall. The final piece fell into place almost accidentally. Noah had started working late nights at the firm, which left the house eerily quiet. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered downstairs for water. As I passed the study, I heard my father's voice on the phone, low, clipped, controlled. "She can't prove anything unless she gets her hands on the affidavits. Those were handled internally, and no one outside the firm has copies. The witnesses were employees. We own that narrative." I froze, pressing myself against the wall. "If she starts asking questions publicly," he continued, "we'll frame it as a misunderstanding. Emotional grief, confusion, old memories. She's the quiet one. No one will believe she'd go after her family." He chuckled softly, and in that moment I realized something terrifying. This wasn't negligence. It was calculated. I recorded everything. The next day, I met Mr. Dalton again. I played the audio. He sat back, eyebrows raised. "That's coercion," he said flatly. "If we can tie that to the timing of the revised will, it's not just a civil case anymore. It's criminal fraud." My stomach nodded, but it wasn't fear. It was focus. "Then that's what we'll do." We pored over the scanned documents together. Dalton noticed something I'd missed before. The witness signatures on the fraudulent will belonged to 2 junior associates who'd mysteriously left the firm shortly after the will was filed. A few calls later, he tracked down one of them. Claire, now working at a different law office in Seattle, she agreed to meet. Claire was nervous, chain-smoking on the cafe patio. "I shouldn't be talking to you," she said immediately. "Your father made us sign NDAs." "I'm not asking you to incriminate yourself," I said softly. "I just want the truth. Did my grandmother sign that revised will willingly?" She stared at her cigarette for a long time before whispering, "No, she didn't." "She refused at first, but your father said if we didn't cooperate, our careers were over. He told her it was just a clarification to avoid future disputes. She was too tired to fight. She signed under pressure." It hit me like cold water. I'd suspected, but hearing it out loud made everything real. "Would you be willing to testify?" I asked. Her eyes darted nervously. "Not unless I'm subpoenaed. But if you have the original documents and that audio, you have more than enough to bury them legally." I thanked her. On the drive home, the world outside blurred past my windshield. Trees, cars, lights, all blending into streaks. This was bigger than I'd let myself imagine. My family hadn't just cut me out, they'd broken the law to do it. Back at the estate, the atmosphere had shifted. Noah was snapping at everyone. My father had started locking the study every time he left the room. My mother hovered, watching me with a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. At dinner, Noah suddenly asked, "Have you been talking to anyone outside the family?" I feigned confusion. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward. "I mean lawyers, reporters, anyone." My fork hovered over my plate. "Noah, why would I talk to reporters? I'm just trying to enjoy being home." He stared at me a moment longer before leaning back. "Right, enjoy." But the seed of doubt had taken root. I could see it in his eyes. That night, sitting by my window, I scrolled through my notes. Audio recordings, scanned originals, witness testimony, ledgers, timelines, all of it aligned. Twist one had crystallized. My father had coerced my grandmother into signing a fraudulent will. Noah had benefited knowingly, and they'd buried the truth for 3 years. And now their perfect narrative had a heartbeat of its own, one I controlled. By the time I'd finished mapping out every piece of evidence, I knew one thing. If I went straight to court, they'd circle the wagons. They'd spin the story, manipulate public perception, make me look like the ungrateful daughter. I needed to destabilize them first, make them panic. Panic makes smart people sloppy. So I decided to set the stage inside the house. The Bishop estate had always been a place of control, every event carefully choreographed, every conversation filtered through social masks. My father controlled through intellect, Noah through arrogance, my mother through guilt. I decided to take each of those strengths and quietly turn them against them. The first move was small but deliberate. I requested a family dinner in the formal dining room. It wasn't something I'd ever done before. Usually, I was the one quietly being told when dinner would happen, not the one initiating it. My mother was delighted at first, thinking it was a sign that I was reconnecting. My father was curious. Noah skeptical. "I just feel like we haven't had a proper family night in a long time," I said sweetly. "No work calls, no phones, just us." That alone was enough to make Noah twitch. The night of the dinner, I cooked. It was an old family recipe Grandma Leela used to make, roast chicken with lemon and rosemary. The smell filled the house, warm and familiar. I set the table meticulously, lit candles, polished silverware. Everything looked picture perfect. Exactly the kind of setting they loved for appearances. My father arrived first, loosened tie and cautious smile. "This is unexpected," he said. "Good unexpected," I replied. My mother floated in next, practically glowing, already imagining this as the moment our family became close again. Noah showed up last, scrolling his phone until I cleared my throat pointedly. Once we sat down, I steered the conversation like a surgeon with a scalpel. "So," I began, carving a piece of chicken, "I've been thinking a lot about Grandma lately. It's strange being back here. Every corner reminds me of her." My mother smiled wistfully. "She adored you," Noah smirked. "She adored everyone." I tilted my head. "Did she? I always thought she had a very clear sense of fairness. She liked things to be balanced. Remember how she used to say, 'Family legacies are built on truth'?" The fork paused in my father's hand. A tiny, barely perceptible shift. I didn't press. I simply let the silence stretch before changing the subject as if nothing had happened. It was a single thread pulled loose, but I saw the ripple it created. The second move was more strategic. The following day, I made a subtle but explosive post on my private Instagram. I didn't name names. I simply wrote, "Sometimes the people who preach fairness the loudest are the ones rewriting the story behind closed doors. I grew up in a house full of secrets." But secrets have expiration dates. Mantelpiece family #legacy truth, I knew exactly who followed that account. Distant relatives, old family friends, former firm employees. Within hours, the post had quietly spread through the local grapevine. A few cousins messaged me asking, "Is everything okay?" By dinner, my father's jaw was set like granite. My mother was fluttering nervously, and Noah slammed his phone down during dessert. "What is that crap you posted online?" he demanded. I raised my eyebrows. "What crap?" he glared. "Don't play dumb. Everyone's calling Mom asking what's going on. Are you trying to make us look bad?" I leaned back in my chair calmly. "Noah, if people think something's wrong, maybe you should ask yourself why that is." His chair screeched as he stood up. My father intervened smoothly. "Noah, sit. Avia, please, you know how rumors spread." I gave him a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Oh, I do. Better than anyone." They didn't realize it yet, but that single post had planted a ticking clock. Their pristine reputation had always been their armor. I just put a crack in it. My third move involved Claire, the former associate who'd witnessed the fraudulent signing. With Dalton's help, I quietly had her prepare a sworn statement, not filed in court yet, but ready. I made sure the document was printed, stamped, and locked in a fireproof box at my apartment in the city. If anything happened to me, Dalton had instructions to release everything to the press. That knowledge alone gave me a dangerous calm. One evening, as I was reading in the sunroom, Noah stormed in, his face flushed. He threw a folded piece of paper on the table. It was the fake legal inquiry letter I'd planted weeks earlier. "I found this in Dad's office," he hissed. "What game are you playing?" I looked at it and shrugged. "Oh, just something I was curious about." "Curious?" He leaned closer. "You're trying to start something?" "Maybe I am," I said softly. "Or maybe I just stopped pretending I don't notice when things don't add up." His nostrils flared. "You're going to regret this." I met his gaze steadily. "I don't think so." That was the first real crack in Noah's mask. For all his swagger, he wasn't good under pressure. And now I was applying it deliberately. The night ended with a quiet conversation between my parents in the study. I listened from the hallway. "She's provoking him," my mother whispered, frantic. "She's not the same girl, Robert. She's different." "She's bluffing," my father said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "She doesn't have proof. She's fishing. She's making us look vulnerable." For the first time, I heard hesitation in his tone. That was all I needed to know. The Bishop empire was beginning to crack from the inside. Before going to bed, I stood by my window, watching the reflection of the lake under the night sky. This house had been their fortress for decades. But slowly, piece by piece, I was taking it apart, not with explosions, but with threads unraveling quietly. They still thought they were in control. They had no idea I'd already moved my queen. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of quiet calculation and simmering tension. Every day inside the Bishop estate felt like playing chess with people who didn't know they were losing. I woke early, ran by the lake to clear my head, had polite breakfasts with my parents, endured Noah's suspicious glances, then spent my afternoons in the city, or so they thought. In reality, I was working with Mr. Dalton almost daily now. We met in his modest office, walls lined with dusty legal books and the faint smell of old coffee. He wasn't flashy like my father, he was thorough. Steady. The kind of lawyer who built his cases brick by brick until the other side realized too late that the walls had closed in. On his desk lay folders stacked neatly, Sworn statements, timelines, certified copies of the original will, my recordings, Claire's testimony, financial trails. This is enough to file, he told me one afternoon, tapping the stack. But once we do, there's no turning back. They'll hit back hard. I know, I said quietly. But I'm not rushing. I want them off balance first. Dalton gave me a long, assessing look. You're your grandmother's granddaughter. That made me smile. That's the plan. Meanwhile, inside the house, I turned up the psychological heat. Noah was always the weak link, not because he wasn't smart, but because his ego was bigger than his foresight. So I decided to exploit that. I started planting subtle remarks in our conversations, things that sounded innocent but gnawed at his insecurities. One morning over coffee, I casually said, "It's funny how Grandma always believed the lake house should go to the person who valued it most. She used to say that to me all the time." He stared at me, spoon midair. "She said that?" "Yeah," I said, sipping my coffee like it was nothing. "We spent a lot of nights talking out there." He said nothing, but later that day, I noticed him rummaging through old boxes in the attic like a man searching for proof. Good. Another time, I mentioned to my father in passing, "Mr. Dalton always spoke so highly of Grandma. I ran into him downtown the other day." His eyes flickered just slightly. "Oh, what did he say?" "Nothing much, just reminiscing." I smiled. He remembers everything in such detail. My father gave me a long, searching look before nodding curtly. He didn't ask any more questions, but I could tell that single seed unsettled him more than any direct confrontation could. Then came the gala. Every year, my parents hosted a formal gala for the firm and prominent families in Portland. It was their stage, a polished, glittering event where they reminded everyone of their power. I decided this year would be different. I wore a sleek black dress, simple but commanding, my hair pulled back sharply. I didn't play the shy daughter. I walked in like someone who belonged. Noah gave me a wary look when I entered the ballroom. "You're actually staying for the whole thing this year." "Of course," I said smoothly. "Wouldn't miss it." The night unfolded in predictable patterns, boasts, toasts, calculated laughter. My parents worked the room like politicians, Noah soaked in attention, and I floated through conversations with an ease that surprised even me. People asked about my residency, my future plans. I smiled, answered gracefully, and tucked away every little reaction when I mentioned I'd been spending a lot of time revisiting Grandma's affairs lately. That single line worked better than any public announcement. People exchanged glances. Some asked polite follow-up questions. Others simply filed it away for gossip later. I knew exactly how fast news traveled in this community. By the end of the night, whispers had already begun to circulate. "She's looking into the estate. There might be something there. The Bishop kids." Noah caught wind of it before dessert. He cornered me near the hallway leading to the coat check, his smile tight. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. I feigned innocence. "Enjoying the party." "You're stirring things up. Stop." "Why?" I asked softly. "Afraid of what people might find out if they start asking questions?" His jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're playing with." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "No, Noah, you don't." For the first time, he didn't have a snappy comeback, just a flicker of something raw fear, maybe, or the realization that I wasn't bluffing. The next morning, the house was tense. My father was uncharacteristically silent at breakfast. My mother fussed around nervously, refilling coffee cups no one touched. Noah barely looked at me. They were feeling it now. The pressure wasn't just coming from inside anymore. It was seeping in through their social circles, their precious image starting to wobble. And I hadn't even shown my cards yet. Later that afternoon, I went into the city again, meeting Dalton for what would be the most important preparation yet, drafting the formal notice of contestation. It wasn't a lawsuit yet, it was a legal shot across the bow. The document stated, in crisp legal language, that I had evidence of a fraudulent revision of the estate, and that I intended to challenge the current will in court. Dalton advised we hold off sending it a little longer. Timing was everything. But once it was served, the game would no longer be in whispers, it would be in the open. I took a deep breath, staring at my name at the top of the draft. Ave Bishop contestant. It didn't scare me. It felt right. That night, I returned home to find Noah waiting on the porch, arms crossed. "You're going to ruin everything," he said flatly. "No, Noah," I replied calmly. "I'm going to fix what you all broke." He laughed bitterly. "You think anyone will believe you over Dad, over us?" I stepped past him toward the door. "They don't need to believe me, they just need to see the proof." His face paled just slightly. I didn't turn around, I wanted him to sit with that. Inside, the house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence before a storm. And this time, I was the one steering the wind. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived with a breakfast table. It was 3 days after the gala. The whispers in our social circles had clearly reached their ears. My father's face was locked into that unnervingly calm expression he wore in court when he was cornered. Noah hadn't stopped pacing since dawn. My mother kept pretending everything was normal, arranging flowers, setting out dishes, but the tremor in her hands gave her away. I sat at the table calm, stirring sugar into my coffee like this was just another morning. Finally, my father broke the silence. "Avia," he said evenly, "I think it's time we talked." I looked up, all polite curiosity. "Of course, what about?" Noah slammed his hand against the table. "Cut the act, you're poisoning everyone against us." I raised an eyebrow. "Poisoning or telling the truth?" My father's voice sliced through his. "Enough, Noah." He turned to me. "You've been making comments online, speaking to people you have no business speaking to, and stirring up dangerous speculation. I need to know what exactly you think you're doing." I let the silence breathe, savoring the shift in power. For the first time, they were the ones demanding answers. "I'm just revisiting Grandma's affairs," I said lightly. "I found a few things that didn't add up." My father's eyes hardened. "Such as documents, dates, conversations people remember." I leaned back. "Little inconsistencies," Noah scoffed. "You don't have anything." I smiled slowly. "Don't I?" The way his expression faltered for just a second told me everything. Later that day, I made my move. Dalton and I finalized the notice of contestation and had it couriered directly to my parents' law firm. No press, no dramatic service at the house, just a quiet legal document landing on their desks like a live grenade. It was official. Avia Bishop was legally challenging the will and trust structure of the Bishop estate. By 3 p.m., the house was buzzing like a hive that had been kicked. My father stormed home early, something he almost never did, briefcase still in hand. He found me in the sunroom, where Grandma used to play piano, sunlight catching the dust motes in the air. "You filed," he said flatly. "Yes," I said. "You've made a serious mistake." I met his gaze. "No, you did. 3 years ago, I'm just correcting it." His jaw clenched. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family, to this firm?" "Yes," I said softly. "For the first time, I've forced you to stop pretending." For a long moment, we stood there, the weight of decades pressing down between us. I'd spent my entire life shrinking in this man's presence, but not anymore. "This is going to get ugly," he warned. "I'm counting on it," I said. Noah exploded that night. He cornered me outside my room, voice raised, eyes wild. "You're insane. Do you want to destroy everything Grandma built?" "She built it," I snapped. "You stole it." His face flushed red. "Dad's not going to let you win. He'll bury you legally." "I'm not you, Noah," I said quietly. "I know how to survive in a system that underestimates me." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, fear again, before he shoved his hands through his hair and stormed off, muttering curses down the hall. Within 24 hours, I got exactly what I'd expected: a family intervention. They gathered in the living room that evening, the same one where I'd spent countless childhood nights being ignored while Noah's achievements were celebrated. Now the spotlight was on me. My father stood like a prosecutor, my mother perched on the couch like a trembling witness, and Noah paced like a caged animal. "This is your last chance," my father began. "Withdraw the contest and we can handle this internally. No public mess, no legal escalation." I crossed my arms. "Why would I do that?" "Because you're family," my mother whispered desperately. "Because we can fix this together." I laughed softly, not bitter, just tired. "You did fix anything 3 years ago, you buried it." Noah jumped in. "You don't even want this estate, you're a doctor, you have your own life, you don't care about legacy." "That's where you're wrong," I said. "I care about the truth, about fairness, about Grandma's wishes, and you erased them." My father stepped closer. "Avia, this is bigger than you understand." I met his gaze steadily. "No, this is exactly as big as I understand." For a second, the mask slipped. I saw the man behind the reputation, angry, cornered, calculating, and I realized something important: he wasn't invincible. He was terrified of losing control. 2 days later, the first press leak hit. Not from me, Dalton and I had kept everything sealed. But whispers had turned into stories, and stories had found reporters. A legal blog published a small article. "Insider sources: Bishop estate facing legal contestation over alleged fraudulent will revision." It wasn't front-page news yet, but it was enough. Phones started ringing. Distant relatives called just to check in. Noah's friends texted him. My mother's charity board asked questions. The perfect Bishop image was cracking. That night, as the house fell into uneasy silence, I sat at Grandma's piano, fingers resting on the keys. I didn't play. I just let the silence stretch. For years, I'd been the quiet one at this piano, drowned out by Noah's laughter, my parents' chatter. Now the quiet belonged to me. The first battle had been fought, not with screaming, but with signatures and strategy. And judging by their frantic reactions, I'd hit exactly where it hurt. When powerful people feel cornered, they don't apologize, they retaliate. The morning after the legal notice became public knowledge, my father went into crisis mode. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam doors. He simply moved like a lawyer preparing for war. Meetings were scheduled at the firm. Phone calls were made. Noah followed him around like a shadow, his usual arrogance sharpened into something more venomous. I knew exactly what they were doing before it happened. I'd seen my father destroy people in court, dismantling their credibility piece by piece until no one remembered the facts, only the image he'd painted. This time, the target was me. It started with whispers. An anonymous source began leaking selective pieces of my past to gossip blogs and legal insiders. Stories of my rebellious teenage years, exaggerated accounts of me cutting off family contact during med school, implications that I was emotionally unstable and easily influenced. None of it was illegal. All of it was crafted to make me look unreliable, erratic, and unfit to handle something as complex as an estate. Noah amplified it on social media through back channels, mutual friends, acquaintances. He didn't tag me, but the timing was too precise to be coincidence. Some people can't handle legacy, one of his posts read. Jealousy looks ugly on the family. I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because while they were busy attacking my image, I was tightening the noose. The first countermove came through Mr. Dalton. We filed a formal request for discovery, a legal process forcing the opposing party to disclose key documents. My father had expected this eventually, but not so soon. The moment the paperwork landed on his desk, his calm veneer cracked. I watched him that evening as he stood by the fireplace, flipping through the documents like someone trying to find a hidden escape clause. My mother hovered anxiously, whispering questions he barely answered. Noah stormed in. "Why are we even playing along with this? We should crush her. Shut this down." My father snapped. "This is not a bar fight, Noah. This is a legal proceeding. She's playing it smart." For once, Noah fell silent. The second countermove was quieter but far more effective. I started meeting with journalists off the record. These weren't tabloid reporters. They were investigative journalists who had history with exposing power abuses in Portland's legal community. I didn't hand them the entire story. I gave them crumbs, enough to make them curious, to make them start digging into my father's firm. I knew exactly where to point them: the fraudulent witness signatures, the coerced will revision, the timeline discrepancies. If they pulled at any of those threads long enough, the fabric would tear on its own. Dalton wasn't thrilled at first. He worried it might complicate the legal battle. But when I explained my strategy, his lips curved into a slow smile. "You're not just fighting them in court. You're fighting them in the court of public opinion." Leela would have approved. And then the twist walked through the front door. I was in the kitchen late one afternoon making tea when the housekeeper buzzed to say a visitor had arrived. A woman, mid-40s, professional attire. Her name, Evelyn Grant. She was a senior partner at another prestigious law firm, and years ago she had worked alongside my father before leaving abruptly. I'd met her once as a child, vaguely remembering her as the woman who brought me peppermint candies. "Avia," she said, offering a handshake, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced." I hesitated, then gestured for her to come in. She lowered her voice. "I've been following what's happening, and I think you should know something. Your father didn't just revise the will, he buried another document." My breath caught. "What document?" She looked around, ensuring we were alone. "Your grandmother drafted a second trust, separate from the main estate. It was meant to fund a medical scholarship foundation in your name. She told me about it before she passed. When the revised will was filed, that trust disappeared. I didn't have the authority to fight him back then, but I remember the dates. I have records. A scholarship foundation. In my name, hidden. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about erasing my grandmother's legacy entirely." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Her expression hardened. "Because I've seen what Robert does to people who stand in his way. You're not the first, but you might be the one who can stop him." That night, I pored over the records Evelyn gave me. They were meticulous: meeting notes, preliminary drafts, internal memos. Everything pointed to a second trust that vanished during the same 2-week window when my father coerced Grandma into signing the fraudulent will. Dalton's voice over the phone was grim but steady. "This changes the game. If we can prove he destroyed or concealed a charitable trust, that's not just fraud. It's potentially criminal misconduct under state law. I sat in my room long after the call ended, the documents spread out like a crime scene. They'd stolen money. They'd rewritten a will. And they'd buried Grandma's attempt to honor me in the most meaningful way she could imagine. This was no longer just about reclaiming property. This was about justice for her. The Bishop family responded predictably. The next morning, my father called a family meeting in his office. He didn't invite Evelyn, of course. He wanted control back. "I know you've been speaking to outsiders," he said smoothly, eyes like knives. "That ends now." I leaned forward. "No, Dad, that started 3 years ago when you decided to rewrite the truth." Noah muttered something under his breath, but my father silenced him with a look. He tried every tactic: logic, guilt, intimidation. He reminded me of the family reputation, the consequences, the years he'd built this empire. I didn't budge. Finally, he said, "If you keep going down this path, there's no coming back from it." I met his gaze. "I don't plan on coming back." For a moment, silence filled the room like a living thing, and for the first time, I saw something raw flicker across his face, not just anger. Fear. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a battlefield with velvet curtains. Every room had an invisible current running through it, a tension that thickened each time someone opened their mouth. My father moved through the halls with the same sharp energy he used in court. My mother fluttered nervously between us like a diplomat in a crumbling peace treaty. Noah was unpredictable, simmering between aggression and panic, like a man who realized too late that the ground beneath him was shifting. Their counterattack began quietly but hit hard. Within a week of the legal contestation, a high-profile PR firm began circulating carefully crafted statements to the press. Articles appeared painting my father as a respected attorney unfairly targeted by family disputes. Anonymous sources described me as emotionally volatile and estranged. They questioned why someone, so successful in medicine, would suddenly become interested in old family money. The language was subtle but lethal, designed to corrode my credibility without ever naming me directly. Then came the legal blow. My father's firm filed a motion to dismiss my contestation on procedural grounds, claiming I missed the statute of limitations and lacked standing to challenge the revised will. Dalton had warned me this might happen. It was classic Robert Bishop strategy: overwhelm the opponent with early technicalities, drown them in motions, stall the case until they broke. But I wasn't going to break. We spent long nights in Dalton's office going over every clause, every signature, every piece of evidence. He was relentless, and so was I. Together, we built a counterargument strong enough to keep the case alive. When my father's team realized we weren't retreating, they escalated. Anonymous legal blogs began speculating about my mental health. Former acquaintances received calls from unknown numbers asking odd questions about me. Someone even contacted the hospital where I was set to begin residency, hinting that I was involved in a messy legal scandal. That was Noah's doing. I could tell by the recklessness of it. One evening, I caught him waiting outside my room. His eyes were bloodshot, his breath sharp with whiskey. "You think you're winning?" he spat. "You're tearing this family apart." "Noah," I said quietly, "the family tore itself apart the day you all decided to erase Grandma's wishes." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "You're not stronger than Dad, you never were." I didn't flinch. "I don't have to be stronger, I just have to be smarter." He shoved past me, muttering curses as he stormed down the hall. His mask was slipping fast, and that made him dangerous. The next morning, I found out just how far they were willing to go. A glossy magazine ran an op-ed questioning my motives, quoting a close family member who suggested I was being manipulated by outside parties with ulterior motives. It was a direct hit, meant to isolate me. My phone buzzed all day with messages from colleagues and old classmates. Some were supportive, others were cautious. I didn't respond to any of them. That night, I made my countermove. With Dalton's help, I leaked select portions of the original will and the second trust documents Evelyn had given me to one of the investigative journalists I'd spoken to earlier. Not everything, just enough to prove that serious legal inconsistencies existed. The journalist verified the documents independently before publishing a carefully worded piece. It didn't accuse anyone outright. It simply laid out facts: 2 versions of the will, conflicting dates, a missing charitable trust, and unusual pressure exerted by the Bishop firm during the final weeks of Grandma's life. The article spread quickly. It wasn't sensationalist, but it was credible, and that made it dangerous. By evening, local news channels were running segments. Legal commentators started weighing in. What had been a quiet family conflict was now a matter of public interest. Noah exploded first. He barged into the kitchen while I was making tea, waving his phone in my face. "You leaked this, you're ruining us." I stirred my tea slowly. "No, Noah, I just told the truth." My father's reaction was quieter but more dangerous. He called me into his study that night, the same room where I'd once overheard his secrets. He didn't yell, he didn't even look angry. He looked calculating. "You think you've trapped me," he said softly. "But all you've done is put yourself on trial in the court of public opinion. You're gambling with your reputation." I met his gaze evenly. "And you're gambling with the truth." For the first time, his eyes flickered. It was small, but I saw it. A flash of something underneath the practiced calm. Not panic, not yet, but the realization that I wasn't bluffing. After I left his office, I stood on the balcony overlooking the lake. The air was cool and heavy with the smell of rain. I could hear faint voices from downstairs, my parents arguing in low, tense tones. Noah's sharper voice cutting through. They were unraveling, slowly but surely. In the distance, thunder rumbled. The storm that had been gathering for weeks was finally approaching. I tightened my grip on the railing and whispered into the dark, "It's time." The day of the preliminary hearing arrived with a heavy sky. Clouds hung low over the courthouse like a warning. I stood on the courthouse steps with Dalton beside me, my heart pounding but my mind razor-sharp. For months, everything had been maneuvering in the shadows, family dinners, whispered threats, quiet leaks, but this was different. This was daylight, no more masks. Camera flashes burst around us as we approached the entrance. Reporters called my name, their voices overlapping. "Avia, why challenge your own family? Is it true your father committed fraud? Are you doing this for money or justice?" I didn't stop, I didn't answer. I kept walking, head high, black coat billowing behind me like a quiet flag. I wasn't here to perform, I was here to fight. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool and sterile. My father sat at the opposing table, flanked by his legal team. His posture was impeccable, his face carved into that courtroom mask I'd seen 1,000 times. Noah sat beside him, tapping his knee relentlessly, jaw tight. My mother was behind them, pale and tense, her hands clasped like she was praying for a miracle. Dalton leaned toward me and whispered, "Remember, this isn't the full trial. Today is about standing your ground." I nodded, eyes locked on my father. He gave me a small, controlled smile. It wasn't warm, it was a warning, but I was done being warned. The judge entered and the room rose. As the proceedings began, my father's attorneys launched their opening arguments with clinical precision. They framed the entire case as a tragic misunderstanding fueled by emotional instability and external manipulation. They painted me as a distant daughter who had reconnected too late and was now swayed by outsiders to create chaos. It was textbook Robert Bishop's strategy: redefine the narrative before the facts could breathe. Then it was our turn. Dalton stood, his voice calm but commanding. He didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He laid out the evidence with surgical clarity. The original will, the fraudulent revision, Claire's sworn testimony, the suspicious 2-week period, and the missing trust. As he spoke, the quiet confidence in his voice began to shift the air in the room. It wasn't just me against them anymore. It was facts against fiction. When Claire took the stand, the tension snapped like a wire. She testified about the night she was pressured to witness the fraudulent signing. She described my father's calculated words, Noah's uneasy silence, and my grandmother's confused state. Every sentence landed like a stone. Noah shifted in his seat, glancing at my father, who remained perfectly still, though his knuckles whitened around his pen. Then Dalton dropped the twist. He introduced Evelyn's records, the existence of the second trust. The courtroom murmured as the documents were projected on the screen. Legal drafts, dated memos, correspondence between Grandma and Evelyn. A clear trail leading to the creation of a medical scholarship foundation in my name and its unexplained disappearance shortly after the will was changed. For the first time, my father's mask cracked. It was subtle, a flicker in his eyes, a tightening around the mouth, but I saw it. And so did the judge. Noah couldn't contain himself. He leaned toward his father, whispering furiously, then slammed his hand on the table when my father didn't respond. The bailiff warned him to calm down. His outburst didn't help their image. Dalton's closing statement was measured but powerful. "This isn't just about inheritance. It's about honoring the truth of a woman's legacy. The evidence shows not only a fraudulent revision, but the deliberate concealment of a charitable trust. This case deserves to proceed. Anything less would be a betrayal of justice." When the judge finally spoke, the room held its breath. "The court finds sufficient grounds to proceed with a full trial," he said. A wave of sound rippled through the courtroom. Noah muttered a curse under his breath. My mother covered her mouth. My father remained silent, but his eyes locked on mine with a heat that felt like a challenge. Outside, the courthouse steps were a sea of cameras and microphones, but this time, I stopped. I looked straight at the reporters and said clearly, "This is not about revenge, it's about truth, and I will see it through to the end." That clip aired on every local news channel that night. Back at the house, the atmosphere was toxic. Noah slammed doors. My father retreated into his study for hours. My mother tried to speak to me in the hallway, her voice trembling. "Avia, please, this is going too far." I turned to her, my voice steady. "Too far was when you all watched him rewrite Grandma's legacy and said nothing." She flinched but didn't deny it. She couldn't. As I walked away, a strange calm settled over me. The storm had broken. The truth was out in the open, and for the first time, they were the ones scrambling to keep their story straight. I stood by my bedroom window late that night, looking out at the dark lake. This house had once made me feel small, unwanted, invisible, but now it was just walls. It held no power over me anymore. The war wasn't over. But the full trial began on a cold Monday morning. The courthouse was packed. Journalists, distant relatives, curious onlookers, even former colleagues of my father who wanted to see how the mighty Robert Bishop would handle being on the defensive. I felt the weight of all those eyes on me as I walked to my seat, but for once, it didn't crush me. It lifted me. Dalton placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "Stay steady. We don't need theatrics, we have the truth." Across the aisle, my father sat immaculately composed, his suit perfect, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. He looked every bit the seasoned attorney ready to crush his opponent. Noah was beside him, though his posture betrayed him, fidgeting, lips pressed tight, sweat on his forehead. My mother clutched her purse on the bench behind them like it was a life raft. The prosecution of my case began with a slow build. Claire returned to the stand, her testimony unshaken even under brutal cross-examination. Dalton guided her through each detail, and the jury listened intently. Evelyn's documents about the second trust were presented in full. Each page projected on the screen was another chisel blow at the Bishop facade. My father's team counterattacked ferociously. They brought in character witnesses who spoke about my emotional distance, painted me as an ambitious woman out for money, even suggested Evelyn had an old grudge against my father. For a moment, the courtroom felt like it was tipping their way. But Dalton anticipated it. He pivoted back to the paper trail, the dates, the missing filings, the sudden disappearance of trust funds. Facts were sturdier than gossip. And then came the second twist. Noah was called to the stand. My father's plan was obvious. Use his son to humanize their story, to frame me as the unstable sibling while Noah portrayed himself as the loyal heir carrying the family torch. But it backfired. At first, Noah parroted their narrative. He spoke about how I distanced myself, how Dad had only acted in the family's best interest, how Grandma wasn't in the right state of mind. But as Dalton pressed him, cracks appeared. "Mr. Bishop," Dalton asked, "were you present when your grandmother signed the revised will?" "Yes. And did you hear her express confusion about what she was signing?" Noah hesitated. His eyes flickered toward our father. She asked a few questions, yes. "Questions your father answered for her?" "Yes." "And did she look reluctant?" Silence. The judge leaned forward. "Please answer the question." Noah's voice broke. "Yes." A ripple went through the courtroom. My father's head snapped toward him, fury flashing in his eyes, but Noah wasn't finished. His composure collapsed under the weight of months of pressure. "She didn't want to change it," he blurted. "She did, Dad pushed her, I didn't stop it." The room erupted. The judge slammed the gavel for order. I sat frozen, heart racing, as Noah stared down at the table, ashamed and broken. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. It was the betrayal he hadn't prepared for. His own son, the one he'd groomed, had cracked under oath. Dalton didn't need to press further. The damage was done. Noah's words were the nail in the coffin. When closing arguments came, my father's voice was sharp but hollow. He argued for legacy, for family reputation, for loyalty, but the mask was gone. The jury had seen through it. Dalton, in contrast, closed with quiet conviction. "This case is not about wealth. It is about integrity." A woman's last wishes were erased. A daughter was silenced. "Today, you have the chance to restore what was stolen." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the verdict was clear. The fraudulent will was invalidated. The estate reverted to the original distribution, including the reinstatement of the second trust in my name. The courtroom buzzed with the weight of it. My mother wept quietly. Noah sat hunched, staring at nothing. My father didn't move at all. He looked like a statue, carved out of pride and fury, staring straight ahead as if refusing to accept defeat. I stepped outside into the cold air, the press surging toward me. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter, the unwanted child. I felt whole. This isn't about money, I told the cameras. It's about the truth. My grandmother believed in fairness, in legacy, in love. Today, her voice was heard. That night, back at the house, I walked through the halls one last time. The portraits on the wall, the polished wood floors, the scent of old books, it all felt different now. This place no longer owned me. I wasn't bound to it. I stood by the piano where Grandma used to sit and whispered, "We did it." Then I left, closing the door behind me, carrying nothing but freedom and the certainty that I had broken the cycle. In the weeks after the verdict, the house grew quiet in a way I had never heard before. Not the tense, watchful silence of plotting, but a hollow stillness, like an echo after a storm. The Bishop estate, once a monument to control and appearances, now felt like an abandoned theater after the curtain had fallen. My father withdrew from public life almost overnight. His reputation took a hit that even his skill couldn't completely contain. Colleagues distanced themselves. Former allies turned polite but cold. For the first time in decades, Robert Bishop was not the man holding all the cards. I heard he spent long hours in his study, poring over old documents as if trying to rewrite the past one last time. Noah left town. There was no dramatic goodbye between us, no teary confrontation. One day he was pacing the halls, the next his room was empty. I wasn't angry. Strangely, I felt a faint kind of pity. He had been raised to be a mirror of our father. The moment the mirror cracked, he didn't know who he was anymore. My mother tried to reach out a few times, timidly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. She brought me coffee one morning, the way she used to when I was a teenager cramming for exams. We sat on the porch watching the lake, neither of us speaking for a long time. Eventually, she said, "I should have stopped him." I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. For years, she'd been the quiet accomplice, the one who chose comfort over truth. But in that moment, I saw a woman who finally understood the cost of her silence. I didn't forgive her that day. Forgiveness isn't something that can be forced like a courtroom ruling, but I stopped hating her. That was enough. Rebuilding my life wasn't a cinematic montage. It was slow, sometimes messy, always real. I moved out of the house permanently and rented a small apartment near the hospital where I would begin my residency. The space was modest, but it was mine. No portraits staring down at me. No footsteps echoing down long, judgmental hallways. Just sunlight through wide windows, the scent of fresh coffee in the mornings, and the sound of my own laughter filling the rooms. I took legal control of the second trust, the one Grandma had created in my name. Dalton helped me set up the Medical Scholarship Foundation exactly as she'd planned. We named it the Leela Bishop Medical Trust. At the first board meeting, when I signed the final papers to bring it into existence, I felt a warmth bloom in my chest. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about carrying forward something good, something honest. Journalists kept calling for interviews, wanting more details about the trial, about my father. I declined most of them. This wasn't my life's headline. It was just a chapter. A messy, painful, transformative chapter. One evening, months after the verdict, I returned to the estate alone. It was late summer, and the air was thick with the scent of grass and lake water. I walked through the empty halls slowly, taking it all in one last time. In the music room, dust floated in the golden light streaming through the windows. The piano sat exactly where Grandma had left it. I sat on the bench, fingers brushing the keys. For years, I had avoided playing here because it felt like someone else's stage. That night, I played. Just a simple melody Grandma used to hum. It echoed softly through the house like a quiet goodbye. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was just free. I locked the door on my way out and didn't look back. The foundation launched publicly that fall. Scholarships were awarded to medical students from underrepresented communities, exactly the way Grandma had envisioned. At the opening ceremony, I gave a short speech. I talked about legacy, about truth, about the quiet power of standing up even when your voice shakes. Reporters called it moving. For me, it was personal. I could feel Grandma in that room, not in some mystical way, but in the solid presence of the work she had started and I had finished. Dalton was there too, smiling quietly from the back. She'd be proud, he told me afterward. I think she'd be relieved, I said. She always hated unfinished business. Sometimes people ask me if I regret taking my family to court. They ask if it was worth the pain, the exposure, the broken ties. My answer is always the same: I regret nothing. Justice isn't clean. It doesn't tie everything into a perfect bow. There are still fractures between me and my mother, and probably always will be. Noah is still out there somewhere, avoiding the wreckage. My father will never admit what he did. But I am no longer the girl standing in the shadows of their choices. I stood up, I told the truth. I built something new. The lake house still stands. Sometimes I drive by it on quiet mornings before my shifts at the hospital. It looks peaceful from the outside, the way it always did. People in town talk about it like a relic of a powerful family. But to me, it's just a house now. Bricks, windows, a piano gathering dust. My life is somewhere else. My story is mine again. And that's the real inheritance.